You know, why are so many of us afraid to talk about death? I mean, I would say, I think the majority of the population is afraid to talk about death. Why do you think that is?
Well, think about the word. What does that bring to your mind? Pain, suffering,
Darkness,
grief,
yeah.
just this veil that hangs over you. And think about the first time you learned about death. Just
Yeah, I can't
hold that in
remember.
your mind.
Yeah.
And what was your thought at that time? I know mine, when I went to my first funeral as a child, it's like, what, this party ends?
Right.
And I kind of lived that way since then. And you have to understand that death is this word that, you know, you can transform from one thing to another. It's allowing you to grow in another direction. And then think back before that. I bet you learned about love well before you ever knew about death. And the reason is that all of that is what we're here to be. That's all part of our whole existence, is that. And grieving is an extension of love. And when you go through that, I've had great loss in the last 2 or 3 years. I lost both my parents, crossed over, my niece, age 19. My best friend from 2nd grade passed away last January.
Wow.
We had an amazing journey on this.
You know, we're talking about how to really have tools to make it a different experience. And you've done that successfully in your life.
When you're mired in the shadows of despair or sorrow, there's always a higher light source behind any darkness that you're in. It's not that light and dark do not exist without each other. The darkness is created by the light. We're always in that light. And that's really what the whole universe is contained in, and that light is love. Love is the very thread that holds the fabric of the universe together. It's why we're here. We're here to share that. We're here to learn what that beautiful word is. And through experiencing that death and going through those pieces and what you perceive as loss, I don't look at it as loss. We're lost in grief. The person who's crossed over is found because they're in that light and only that part. And I take comfort in knowing that.
You know, how can we better deal with grief in general, not just about death, but grief in general? And how can we give people some tools to really understand that? Because we can talk about it, but how do people do that?
Have you ever thought about the worst thing that could ever happen to you? I did this experiment for a whole year. I kept one-upping it. I started out small, and I built up, and I always saved death for the end, because I figured there's nothing worse than that. And one day I ran out of ideas. I started asking other people. I've heard every horrific thing you can possibly think of. And then one day I woke up and there was death. And the next day I was able to one-up it. You see, the worst thing that can ever happen to you is losing your ability to help someone else. And I realized that can never, ever happen because I have a legacy that I can leave behind. There are people that have crossed over or passed on for hundreds of years who are still helping someone today by what they left behind.
And
that is our legacy.
And is that what people, in your experience, get worried about most, that they will pass on without having a legacy to help people?
And that's what you said, you know, in the opening. It's really that, when you have that regret at the end that you didn't bring
life not well lived,
some closure to those items. And my friend who passed away, best friend, I mean, we never questioned our friendship, 2nd grade. And it was a close group of 5 of us. And here he is. He was diagnosed with cancer. And one day I called him. I saw him come up for the holidays, and I saw this pain written on his face. But more so, I saw it written on his wife and his 2 young children. And I called him the next day, and I said, hey, we've been friends forever. Can we be real at this moment? Can we, from this point on, we need to take the gloves off. Can I have your permission for that? And he said yes. And I said, you have a legacy. I said, I don't know how long I have or you. I don't know what our time is left here, but you have something to instill in your kids, that their dad fought this. And I said, you need to bring that. I got the terrible news. Here he is at the hospital. He didn't tell us. I went down and saw him. And I walk in. I have no idea where the floor is. I'm walking, you know, through this thing. I drove down through this major snowstorm, and your mind is racing because you're trying to get in the hospital and find out what floor your friend or loved one is on. And I burst through the door and I hear, "Hi, Uncle Bob," and I'm greeted by his son, 14 years old. He's smiling, ear to ear, greeting me right there. And I was galvanized at that moment. I said, he did it. I walk up in the room, and here he is, unconscious, barely alive, an hour to live. And his daughter's sitting there, and she says, "I'm so glad you're here. You can have a moment with Dad." And she's smiling too. And I thought, he did it. And every time I've seen them since then, they're smiling. He was able to leave that legacy. Amazing. Just think of what that's going to be in those kids and what they're going to carry forward of how their dad lived his life.
I'm so glad you gave him that gift, you know, because if you hadn't said anything, you probably wouldn't have said that.
Right.
Amazing. We'll stay with Robert, and we've got a quick break. When Robert was a teen, something truly astonishing happened that transformed his life and his attitude towards death. I'll ask you about that when we come back.